13-year-old Nolan Grove stood over his best friend, a gun in his hand, and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Kay." Seconds earlier, the firearm had gone off, captured on camera, witnessed by other kids, and replayed in courtrooms for years to come. Nolan Grove was a boy from Red Lion, a small town in York County. He was still young and learning about the world when one afternoon changed everything. Nolan was 13 when his friend, 12-year-old Kane Highland, lost his life. They were kids, small in size and still childish in how they handled jokes and arguments. But that afternoon, a firearm entered their group, and everything shifted. What happened was caught on video, repeated by witnesses, and later examined in court. It started as a case on paper, but quickly became a trial that shaped two families and a community. On April 1st, 2023, the boys were near a home in Red Lion. A security camera inside the house captured key moments. It showed a group of kids, a red laser dot flashing on the wall and sometimes on a hand, and a voice telling Nolan, "Take your finger off the trigger." Kane was seen shielding himself on the floor. That night, a FaceTime call recorded by another boy also captured part of what happened. Testimony and charging documents explained that Nolan pointed the firearm at Kane, and it went off. After the loud shot and the panic that followed, witnesses remembered Nolan apologizing in shock. Those words would later echo in courtrooms and news reports. Investigators also heard from other kids. Some said Nolan had threatened to point the weapon at children before, usually during arguments. Law enforcement treated the case as a homicide. The district attorney brought it before a grand jury. Prosecutors chose to charge Nolan as an adult. The charges included third-degree homicide, having a firearm without permission, and multiple counts of recklessly putting others at risk. The decision to try a 13-year-old as an adult drew strong attention. Kane's family said their loss was immediate and permanent. Nolan's family, on the other hand, said they believed the shot was an accident and tried to explain the context. That idea, that it had not been intentional, became the main defense during trial. So why would a 13-year-old aim a firearm at his friend? Friends and witnesses said it began as a small argument. Nolan had made a rude joke about Kane's mother. Kane told him to stop, and the back and forth grew heated. A thoughtless joke became a threat, and a threat turned into a firearm being raised. But there were more layers. The gun had been easy to access. There was pressure between kids to act tough. Nolan had previously said things like telling girls he would shoot them if he had to. These warnings showed how words among kids can sometimes grow into something serious. The jury reviewed the videos, the statements, and the possibility that Nolan had acted in a quick, heated moment. In the end, they decided the act went beyond childish words. They found him guilty of third-degree homicide and the other charges. In court and in the town, many people asked if this could have been stopped. Some pointed to simple failures. A firearm within reach, kids left unsupervised, small arguments that no adult stepped in to calm. Others pointed to a bigger pattern, repeated threats from Nolan, warnings that never led to intervention. Prosecutors argued the videos showed enough control that the charge of third-degree homicide applied. The defense said it was an accident. Nolan's family repeated the same view, saying it was a tragic mistake. Court reporting showed the emotional side as well. Kane's mother spoke of how she had lost her son. The courtroom also heard how the last 2 years felt like a life sentence of grief for her. People noted how unusual it was that almost everything had been caught on everyday devices, phones and home cameras, making it harder to dispute. By June 2025, the jury reached a verdict. Nolan was found guilty of third-degree homicide, illegal gun possession, and multiple counts of recklessly putting others in danger. A few months later, in August 2025, the judge handed down the sentence. For the main count, Nolan received a term ranging from the mid-teens to the low 30s in years. On top of that came extra years for firearms offenses and probation to follow. The judge spoke directly to Nolan, asking how he planned to change. He told him clearly that what matters now is how he lives when he leaves prison one day. Nolan, who had stayed quiet during most of the hearing, finally spoke. He apologized and said he wanted to honor Kane's memory. Some in the courtroom heard true regret. Others felt it was not enough. Reporters described the sentence as one of the only real outcomes left for Kane's family. His mother told the court about the pain she had lived with since losing her son. His father addressed Nolan directly, telling him to use the time to change his life. Nolan's lawyer argued that the sentence was one of the lowest possible under the law for the charges. Still, the judge added extra years of probation and consecutive terms, meaning Nolan will likely spend a long stretch in a state correctional facility before release is even possible. In the next case, the story centers on a teenager who pressed record and spread the evidence herself. Ash Cooper was a teenager from Bensalem. Her life, and the life of a 12-year-old girl named Morgan Connors, changed forever in late November of 2022. Cooper grew up in a trailer park community in Bucks County. Local press described this background when reporting on her arrest and later plea. Friends and neighbors said that Morgan was close to Cooper. They called her a best friend. Neighbors also told reporters that the two often spent time together watching shows and scrolling through social media. On the night of November 25, 2022, the two were inside Cooper's family trailer. According to official reports, they were watching Netflix when Cooper went to her father's locked safe. She managed to take out a hunting-style firearm kept in the home. Prosecutors later said she removed it just before firing a shot that struck Morgan. That single shot ended the ordinary evening in an instant. The bathroom became the place where Morgan's body was left. Panic quickly followed. Afterward, Cooper did not try to hide what happened completely. She recorded or allowed a recording to be made. The video showed Morgan's legs covered in red stains. Cooper then sent this video to another teen on Instagram. She asked for help to clean up and remove the body. The teen who received the video told her mother. Her mother immediately called the police. Officers arrived and found the firearm and the body, along with signs of an attempted cleanup. When Cooper spoke with police, she reportedly said it was an accident and that she was sorry. She also said she was going to jail for the rest of her life. These words, recorded in official documents, showed her immediate reaction to what had happened. Why did this happen? Prosecutors admitted they never found a clear reason. Some suggested it might have been an accident. Others pointed to Cooper's difficult background and mental health struggles. Still, no single explanation was ever confirmed in court. This left the family of Morgan and the community with unanswered questions. Cooper was first charged as a juvenile, but was later moved into the adult court system. In March of 2024, when she was 18, she accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to third-degree unlawful taking of a life. She also admitted to related charges, including having an instrument connected to the act and tampering with evidence. As part of the deal, she was sentenced to between 15 and 40 years in prison. She also received an additional 7 years of probation after release. The judge spoke about her troubled past and the need for treatment. But he also reminded the courtroom of the seriousness of what happened and the lasting impact on Morgan's family. The plea avoided a full public trial. This meant that graphic evidence and detailed testimony did not have to be shown in court. It also meant Cooper avoided the possibility of a longer prison term. For Morgan's family, however, the sentence could not bring her back. In court, Cooper said little, which is common during plea hearings. In earlier moments, though, she had expressed regret, saying the act was an accident. Her defense team asked the court to consider her young age, her mental health issues, and her upbringing. Prosecutors pushed for a strong sentence, pointing out the cruelty of her actions and the need to protect the public. Morgan's family spoke in court as well. Her grandfather and other relatives described the empty space left in their lives. They talked about the birthdays and school years Morgan would never get to experience. The courtroom became a mix of legal arguments and private grief. The video that Cooper sent remained one of the most disturbing parts of the case. It spread quickly online once police were notified. Many wondered if Cooper sent it as a cry for help, as bragging, or for another reason. No one could answer that fully. What is clear is that the friend who received it did the right thing by telling an adult. That action allowed law enforcement to step in immediately. At sentencing, the judge tried to balance punishment with the chance of rehabilitation. Cooper must serve at least 15 years before being eligible for parole. After release, she will be under supervision for 7 more years. She will also undergo mental health evaluations and receive treatment while in custody. For Morgan's family, the sentence provided a legal conclusion, but not emotional closure. For the community, the case started new conversations. People talked about how firearms are stored, how teens use social media, and how to recognize when a young person is in crisis before tragedy happens. Upcoming is a shocking story of a teen whose brutality stretched across homes and years. Harvey Miguel Robinson was born in Allentown, Pennsylvania, on December 6, 1974. He grew up in a household full of problems. His father drank heavily and had a criminal past. Family members later said the home life was unstable and often harsh. From an early age, Harvey was already on the radar of the police. Reports from school describe him as disruptive, threatening, and often in trouble. Those early issues, combined with his difficult childhood, would later be brought up in court by both investigators and defense lawyers. Between 1992 and 1993, when he was 17 and 18, Harvey carried out a series of break-ins in Allentown. These incidents took 3 people's lives and others seriously hurt. The first known case happened in August 1992. Joan Berghardt, a 29-year-old nurse's aide, was found in her apartment after someone forced their way inside. Evidence collected at the scene later linked Harvey to that break-in. In June 1993, a 15-year-old newspaper carrier named Charlotte Schmoyer disappeared while delivering papers. Her body was later discovered. Reports showed she had been targeted with extreme brutality. Just 1 month later, in July 1993, 47-year-old grandmother Jessica Jean Fortney was found in her home after another break-in. In between these cases, Harvey also targeted other people. One woman managed to survive, and a 5-year-old girl was discovered alive after the incident. The people he chose were of very different ages and backgrounds. This made it difficult for the public to understand why he picked his targets. So why did he do it? Prosecutors argued that his dangerous home life, his arrests from a young age, and his behavior problems shaped him into someone who chose aggressiveness repeatedly. Defense lawyers said brain issues and trauma influenced him. Prosecutors, however, pointed to the deliberate choices he made each time. The pattern in court showed impulsive acts, breaking into homes, harming those inside, and then moving on to another victim. Experts later said that behavior looked like a mix of rage and forced control, with no concern for the harm left behind. His capture came after a tense investigation. A survivor named Denise Sam Calley managed to escape and worked with detectives. Police used her to set a trap, and during the confrontation, Harvey was injured. He managed to get away, but later went to a hospital for treatment. That visit exposed him, and officers arrested him there. Investigators connected him to several scenes using physical evidence. Survivors also identified him. Together, this built the case that prosecutors brought to trial. In the mid-1990s, Harvey went to trial. The state presented evidence of the repeated crimes, forensic matches, and testimony from survivors. The jury found him guilty on multiple counts, including 3 counts of first-degree homicide. In November 1994, he was sentenced to capital punishment for those cases. But the legal story did not end there. Over the years, different courts reviewed his case. Judges considered his age at the time and whether procedures had been followed. In 2012, Harvey accepted a deal that removed the capital penalty for the Charlotte Schmoyer case. He agreed to give up some appeals and instead received a life term for that count. Later hearings reduced or changed some other sentences, though at least one capital penalty remained. In 2019, one judge changed a sentence to 35 years to life after an appeal. Judges also suggested he donate his brain to science, reflecting how unusual and complex his case was. As of today, Harvey remains incarcerated at SCI Phoenix and continues to be involved in appeals. During all the hearings, both sides made strong arguments. Prosecutors described him as dangerous and lacking remorse. Defense lawyers pointed to his harsh childhood, early behavior issues, and possible brain damage. Judges and juries had to decide whether someone who acted as a teenager should face the harshest adult penalties, and whether every step of the legal process had been done correctly. These questions stayed in the appeals for decades. His case also became part of a wider legal debate. In the 2000s and 2010s, courts across the United States began rethinking how juveniles should be sentenced. Many questioned whether teenagers who commit such acts should face the capital penalty at all. Supreme Court rulings and state decisions changed how these cases were handled. For Harvey, those changes did not set him free. But they did open legal doors that his lawyers used to reduce some of his sentences. His case remains one of the most widely studied examples of how the justice system handles young offenders who commit repeated harmful acts. The next case is about a teenager tried as an adult in 1975, in a case so brutal it would resurface in courts 40 years later. Warner Batty Jr. was born in York, Pennsylvania in 1959. His life took a drastic turn on a winter night in 1975. He was only 15 years old at the time, still very young, still figuring out the world. That night, he and an older companion forced a woman into an abandoned building. What happened inside changed everything. The woman was 26-year-old Betty Marie Ilgen Fritz Bradford, a mother. She had been walking when the two young men approached her. They pulled her into the empty property. The place had no heat, no safety, only cold walls and silence. Once inside, Betty was forced to remove her clothing. She was threatened with a sharp tool. She was pressured into acts against her will. She was struck repeatedly with fists and a blunt object. The act left her with severe injuries. Afterward, a mattress was placed over her body, and a fire was started. The photographs taken by investigators showed cuts, bruises, and burns. The fire damaged her body further. Court records describe in detail what happened that night, including the threats, the beating, and the attempt to hide what had been done. These records became the backbone of the prosecution's case. Why did this happen? Court documents suggest it was not carefully planned. It began when the young men spotted her. They forced her to an isolated place. It escalated quickly. It was not tied to theft or money. Instead, the records describe domination, cruelty, and an effort to hide what they had done afterward. Because Batty was so young, his lawyers tried to have the case moved to juvenile court. They argued that he deserved different procedures and treatment. The courts rejected that request. Batty admitted guilt to general homicide. A panel of 3 judges later found him guilty of first-degree homicide and sentenced him to life. The Supreme Court of Pennsylvania reviewed the case in 1978. They considered the evidence and the question of moving it to juvenile court. They upheld the conviction and the life sentence. Legal documents from that period describe the act in detail and explain why the court believed Batty should be treated as an adult. Batty then spent decades behind bars. For many years, his sentence meant life without the possibility of parole. That was the law at the time for certain homicide cases involving juveniles. But over the years, courts began to reconsider such harsh penalties for young offenders. By the 2000s and 2010s, higher courts questioned whether automatic life terms for juveniles were fair. Batty wrote about his situation from prison. He shared his birth year and location, identifying himself as held at State Correctional Institution Rockview. Decades later, new legal rulings opened the door for resentencing. He was brought back to court. In 2017, a judge resentenced Warner Batty. His new sentence was 50 years to life. The court still described the case as brutal, but the resentencing reflected the newer rules for juveniles. Local newspapers reported on the hearing. They described the change in sentencing and revisited the story of Betty Bradford. Batty was not alone that night in 1975. His companion, Donald Rivera, was 18. Rivera went to trial and was convicted of first-degree homicide by a jury. Batty, on the other hand, had admitted guilt and accepted sentencing from the judges. Both were involved in the same events, but the justice system treated them differently, based on their choices in court. Years later, Batty spoke about his feelings. In 2015, he wrote a piece asking, "Are we to languish the rest of our days, to die as prisoners?" His words reflected the frustration of someone who had spent decades inside for an act committed as a teenager. They did not erase what happened, but they showed the perspective of a man hoping for mercy after so many years. Now watch how a planned meeting over money and illegal substances among teens turned fatal. And if you find stories like these important, consider subscribing. Damian Green was a teenager from Altoona, whose name became tied to one of the most painful events in his community. In February of 2020, Damian and 3 other teens set up a meeting with a classmate, 15-year-old Devin Fershing. They told him it was for a deal, but that meeting ended in tragedy. Devin lost his life in an alley, and 4 families were left with heartbreak that would never fully fade. The details that came out were direct and difficult. The group planned to take Devin's money and pot. One of the teens hit Devin with a firearm. In the struggle that followed, the firearm went off. Devin was struck and later passed away. These facts shaped everything that came after. At the time, Damian was only 15. That made him legally a juvenile. But prosecutors chose to move his case into adult court. They argued the seriousness of the event left no other choice. In the justice system, this happens often when a life is lost. It raised the question of whether a child should be treated as an adult when facing something so severe. Damian's defense team said he was still a child. They said he was immature and not the same person after spending more than 3 years in custody. This tension between seeing him as a child and holding him fully accountable shaped all the courtroom discussions. On the night of February 27, 2020, the teens met Devin at Jefferson Park. Authorities later explained that the plan was to take his belongings. 16-year-old Owen Sutherland pulled out a firearm and struck Devin with it. Devin fought back. In the middle of that fight, the firearm discharged. The law treated the event as a planned act of theft that turned fatal. Each teen faced charges linked to theft and homicide. Damian was first charged with second-degree homicide, along with conspiracy and related counts. The case showed how the law can hold a group responsible when a plan to take property ends fatally, even if not everyone pulled the trigger. Before trial, the case went through many hearings. Damian's lawyers asked for the case to move back to juvenile court. That would mean lighter penalties and more focus on rehabilitation. Prosecutors refused. They argued the event was too brutal. Judges reviewed past rulings and the legal rules for deciding if a young person should be tried as an adult. All of this back and forth delayed the trial. In the end, Damian chose a plea deal instead of going to trial. Why did they plan this meeting? Prosecutors said it was for pot and money. That was the motive listed in the early reports and court papers. On one hand, it was simple. On the other hand, it showed how small choices, like carrying a firearm and planning to take property, can grow into something irreversible. The presence of a firearm made the event more than just a fight. It became an armed theft that ended with someone losing their life. So what was Damian's outcome? After spending more than 3 years in custody, Damian accepted a plea deal in June 2023. He pled guilty to third-degree homicide, armed theft charges, and charges tied to arranging the meeting. The second-degree homicide charge was reduced under the agreement. Judge Elizabeth Doyle sentenced him to 15 to 30 years in prison. The sentence reflected the seriousness of the event and the use of a firearm. It also left open the chance of review later. If Damian keeps a clean record and completes programs, early release could become possible. During the hearing, Damian stayed quiet. His lawyer, Dan Kiss, spoke for him. The lawyer said Damian had grown during his years in custody. He had finished high school and even mentored others inside. The defense painted him as a young man who had changed, who could build a better path if given structure. The prosecutor and judge listened, but reminded the court that this began with a planned act that cost a teenager his life. Devin's family chose not to speak much during sentencing. Still, their presence was strongly felt. Outside the court, the community had already shown grief. They created memorials and scholarships in Devin's name. They wanted his memory to live on and to help others. The contrast was clear. One teen was remembered with love and sorrow, while another faced decades behind bars for being part of a plan to take property. The other teens faced their own outcomes. Owen Sutherland, who held the firearm, pled guilty to first-degree homicide and was sentenced to 35 years to life. Logan Persing, who was 15 at the time, pled guilty to third-degree homicide and received 17 to 34 years. A fourth youth who provided the firearm took a plea deal that gave him 10 to 20 years. The different outcomes showed how the law looks at levels of responsibility. The one who fired or caused the fatal wound received the harshest sentence, but even those who helped faced long terms. Damien's mother later spoke out. She said the sentence was unfair. She said her son had grown and helped others while inside. She believed the adult court process was too harsh for a teenager. Families in these cases often say the same. Young people can change, and they deserve another chance. On the other side, prosecutors and victims' families stress accountability and the harm that was done. The court had to balance both sides. The next story asks how a boy of 15 ended up taking the life of a man chasing his dreams of becoming a lawyer. Jordan Wallach was a teenager from York, Pennsylvania. His name became known in the summer of 2010. He was born around 1995, although his exact birth date is not clearly reported. By the middle of 2010, Jordan was spending time with older peers. Together, they became involved in a plan that ended in tragedy. On July 28, 2010, Jordan and 3 others met to carry out a planned street theft. One of them gave Jordan a firearm. Their target was James Jimmy Walmuth III. He was 28 years old, a law student at the University of Pittsburgh. That night, he was in York, sitting on a bench outside the Waterway Bar and Grill. He was on a phone call around 11 at night. Witnesses later said a group approached him asking for money. Jimmy replied that he had none. At that point, one member of the group fired a shot into his back. That shot ended his life. An eyewitness named Corey Pouts told investigators she and her friends had walked past the group near the bar. One of them wore a red shirt. She saw the same person moving toward Jimmy. Moments later, she heard the gunfire. When she looked back, she saw that person, later identified as Jordan, running away. Another one of the group later testified in court. He claimed that Jordan pulled the trigger after Jimmy pushed the gun away. Afterward, Jordan went back to his peers and admitted that he had fired during the theft attempt. Why would a 15-year-old risk everything for such a plan? The motive seemed to be money, influence from older peers, and a readiness to use force when the plan failed. Jordan's part was central. He was the one trusted with the firearm, and he was the one who pulled it. Because of how serious the case was, Jordan was not kept in juvenile court. He was prosecuted as an adult. Before trial, his lawyers tried to block the use of a photo lineup. They argued that his picture stood out compared to the others. He was shorter, had lighter skin, and a smaller head, which made him more noticeable. The prosecution replied that the identification was solid because the witness had enough time and clarity to recognize him. The judge agreed with the prosecution and allowed the evidence. In April 2012, Jordan's trial took place. The jury found him guilty of second-degree unlawful taking of life, theft, and conspiracy to commit theft. The court sentenced him to life in prison with no chance of parole on the most serious count. On top of that, he was given another 7 to 14 years for theft and conspiracy. These extra terms were to run at the same time as the life term. Jordan later appealed his sentence. In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Miller v. Alabama that juveniles cannot automatically receive life without parole. This decision helped Jordan's appeal. His case was sent back for a new hearing. The court confirmed the facts, noting that Jordan accepted the firearm, joined the plan, and carried out the shooting when the victim resisted. In 2016, he was resentenced. His life without parole was replaced with 30 years to life. This meant he could become eligible for parole after 30 years. During resentencing, the judge considered Jordan's age, his ability to change, family background, peer pressure, maturity, and potential for growth. As of now, Jordan is still serving his sentence. In 2021, his case returned to county court for further proceedings. The next case is about a teenager whose arrest unraveled years of unsolved disappearances and revealed a serial pattern investigators had long feared. Joseph Joey Daniel Miller was born on September 2, 1964, in Steelton, Pennsylvania. He grew up in a very unstable home. Reports say his childhood was marked by neglect, mistreatment, and a lack of stability. By the time he was in school, He had learning difficulties, a low IQ, and emotional struggles. Public records describe him as a troubled youth who had difficulty forming healthy connections and controlling his behavior. From the mid-1980s until the early 1990s, Miller carried out a series of harmful acts across Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and nearby areas. He targeted mostly black women. The known victims include Selena Franklin, Stephanie McDuffie, Jeanette Thomas, Kathy Novena Schenck, and Kellyanne Ward. Stephanie McDuffie was 8 months pregnant at the time of her passing. One of the turning points came on August 5, 1992. Miller picked up Clara Johnson near a bar in Harrisburg. She had asked to be dropped off nearby, but Miller took her to another location. He forced himself on her and left her seriously harmed. The very next day, on August 6th, police arrested him in connection with what happened to Johnson. While in custody, Miller gave up his right to remain silent and began confessing. He admitted that he was responsible for taking the lives of Selena Franklin and Stephanie McDuffie. He explained how he would take women, force himself on them, then hit them on the head with a heavy object until they were no longer alive. He buried both Franklin and McDuffie in a landfill in Swatara Township. McDuffie's case shocked many because she was pregnant at the time. Miller's actions showed how little empathy he had. He later admitted that he was also responsible for Jeanette Thomas. She had disappeared after leaving a Harrisburg bar with a man described as looking like Miller. Her body was found in the same Swatara landfill. He also admitted to ending the life of Kathy Novena Schenck at a dump site in Perry County. Finally, he admitted involvement in the disappearance of Kellyanne Ward, who had gone missing back in 1986. Her remains were only identified decades later. Investigators began piecing everything together during the 1992 arrest and questioning. His confession opened the door to a long investigation. Authorities connected him to cold cases, located remains, and prepared multiple charges. In March 1993, Miller went on trial for taking the lives of Selena Franklin and Stephanie McDuffie, along with the abduction and harm of Clara Johnson. A jury in Dauphin County listened to testimony. Clara Johnson, who had survived, gave a detailed account of her encounter. Forensic evidence, burial site evidence, and Miller's own confessions supported the prosecution's case. The jury found him guilty of first-degree homicide in both Franklin and McDuffie's cases, and guilty of abduction in Franklin's case. In sentencing, the jury noted aggravating circumstances, such as previous wrongdoing and additional crimes committed during separate events. They rejected claims that his childhood and mental struggles were enough to reduce his responsibility. Miller received 2 consecutive capital penalties and an additional prison sentence for abduction. His defense team argued that he was mentally disabled, had very low intelligence, and grew up with serious neglect and mistreatment. They tried to argue that this should reduce his punishment. But the state focused on the severity of his actions and the repeated pattern of harm. In 1995, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld the convictions and the capital penalties. Later, however, his sentences were challenged. In the year 2000, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court reviewed the case again. The main convictions stayed in place, but questions were raised about whether someone with intellectual disability should face capital punishment. By 2002, his capital sentences were changed to life imprisonment. This was because courts agreed he was intellectually disabled. In 2008, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court upheld this change. Miller did not accept the outcome quietly. Over the years, he wrote letters to the courts that were sometimes threatening, sometimes pleading. In 1999, for example, he wrote, "If you don't carry out my sentence like I request, I will do it myself." On another occasion, he wrote, "Why do you want to see my kids get hurt like this? I'll just pray you do the right thing." At times, he said he wanted to stop his appeals. At other times, he changed his mind and pushed for them again. This back and forth created a long legal battle that lasted for years. The next case shows how one teenager's split-second choice to pull a trigger stole not just his future, but a child's life. Angelo A.J. Ford first appeared in the news as a teenager whose choices set off a chain of tragic events. There is little known about his early life. His exact birth date, family background, and childhood experiences were not widely reported. What is known is that by August of 2021, A.J. Ford was already connected to a world of street life, peer pressure, and weapons. He was from Sharon Hill, Pennsylvania. This is a small town in Delaware County, right next to Philadelphia. The area has long dealt with challenges involving youth conflicts and neighborhood rivalries. Court records later suggested that A.J.'s younger years may have included personal struggles, emotional hardships, and school difficulties. The turning point came on the night of August 27, 2021. A.J. was only 15 years old. He had gone to a football game at Academy Park High School. But instead of just being a spectator, he became part of something far more dangerous. As the game ended and the crowd began leaving, A.J. and a group of other young males got into a heated argument outside the stadium. There had already been tension during the game, and when the teams left the field, that tension spilled over into the streets. Prosecutors later said that A.J. pulled out a handgun and exchanged fire with a 21-year-old man about a block from the stadium. A.J. fired 5 times. The other man fired back twice. 2 of A.J.'s bullets, prosecutors believed, went in the direction of 3 Sharon Hill police officers who were nearby, helping with crowd control. The officers thought they were being targeted. They fired toward a car they believed was involved. One of their bullets tragically struck 8-year-old Fantability, who was walking home from the game with her family. She did not survive. Even though it was a police bullet that took her life, prosecutors argued that A.J. set the chain of events in motion. One prosecutor said clearly, "There is no loss of life that night if A.J. Ford doesn't bring a gun." After that night, law enforcement acted fast. A.J. was taken into custody and faced several charges. These included attempted harm, serious injury, threats, and multiple weapon offenses. While in custody, A.J. also escaped from a juvenile facility in 2022. He avoided capture for more than a year. During that time, he posted Instagram videos where he showed off weapons and mocked law enforcement. Even after being caught again, his behavior inside the detention center led to more charges. These included harming others, possessing banned items, and breaking jail rules. Prosecutors argued that A.J. showed little sign of regret. The trial process stretched out over months. Prosecutors built their case on witness statements, video footage, bullet shell evidence, and A.J.'s online posts. Witnesses placed him on Coate Street using a .45 caliber weapon. Shell casings from that weapon were found at the scene. Another set of casings from a 9mm weapon was recovered nearby, which prosecutors said matched the position of the other shooter. His defense lawyer tried to explain his actions as those of a troubled teen. She said he had learning disabilities, emotional issues, and was influenced by peers. She asked the court not to define his whole life by what he did at 15. But the court also considered that A.J. had escaped custody, committed more harmful acts, and avoided accountability. By November of 2024, A.J., now 19 years old, stood before Judge G. Michael Green for sentencing. The prosecution asked for a sentence between 32 and 67 years. They said the community and the young girl's family deserved justice. The defense pleaded for a lighter punishment. A.J. read a short statement. He said, "This case took away my youth. I do not want it to take away my life." The judge said he did not hold A.J. directly responsible for the young girl's passing. But he also said that by bringing a weapon to a crowded place, A.J. played a major role in the tragedy. The judge said A.J.'s words in court showed the beginning of change. But he also explained that A.J.'s choices, both before and after his arrest, showed a pattern that needed a strong sentence. In the end, A.J. Ford was sentenced to 14 to 28 years in state prison. He was given credit for about 2 years already served. After prison, he will face 8 more years of probation. The next case begins with more than 60 shots outside a high school game. Zyhide Jones grew up in Philadelphia. He lived in areas where poverty was high, where gangs were active, and where guns were often used. Very little is known about his personal life. His family, schooling, and childhood remain private. Most of what is public focuses only on his actions as a teenager and the court cases that followed. By the year 2022, Zyhide was still in his teens. He was moving through neighborhoods where conflicts sometimes ended with extreme violence. On September 27, 2022, a junior varsity football scrimmage had just ended at Roxborough High School in Philadelphia. 5 young men sat in a parked SUV for about 6 minutes. They were waiting. Reports say they were looking for a 17-year-old. But who exactly they were after remains uncertain. Some say they confused someone for the wrong person. Others believe it was payback for an earlier dispute. When the group stepped out of the vehicle, they fired more than 60 shots toward a crowd of students walking to the locker rooms. 14-year-old Nicola Nick Elizalde, a freshman and football player, was among those there. Nick was not believed to be the target. He was struck in the chest. His mother reached him, but he passed away in her arms. 4 other teens were also struck. Some had surface wounds. Others were more seriously hurt. The scene was chaotic. It was a spray of bullets into a group of young students leaving a game. Zahid Jones later admitted his part. He acknowledged that he was one of the shooters. He said he fired one of the weapons during that ambush. Prosecutors filed a long list of charges against him. These included 2 counts of third-degree unlawfully taking a life, 2 counts of conspiracy, 4 counts of attempted unlawful taking lives for the injured teens, and several weapon-related charges. Why would a teenager open fire into a group where the target was not even certain? That question remains unsettled. Court documents and press statements gave little clarity. The day before, on September 26, 2022, 19-year-old Tamir Jones had lost his life outside his North Philadelphia home. 3 shooters had fired more than 25 shots into the area. Investigators believe Zahid had a role in that event too. They suspect this was tied to the motive behind the Roxborough ambush the next day. Whether the high school shooting was payback, mistaken identity, or an escalation of a feud, the result was the same. A young student lost his life. 4 others were wounded. None of them were connected to whatever dispute had started at all. The defense never gave a clear reason in public records, nothing strong enough to change how the case was reported. When the arrests were made, the case moved quickly. In early 2024, Zahid Jones pleaded guilty. He admitted his part in both the Roxborough ambush and in the loss of life of Tamir Jones the day before. By entering that plea, he avoided a long trial. Judge Barbara McDermott later sentenced him. The sentence was 30 to 60 years in prison. District Attorney Larry Krasner explained that Zahid was held responsible for 2 counts of third-degree taking of life, 2 counts of conspiracy, 4 counts of attempted taking of life, and several gun charges. During sentencing, prosecutors spoke about the harm done to the families and to the community. They said no conviction can bring back the young lives lost. It cannot erase the physical and emotional pain of those who survived or who witnessed the events. The judge considered Zahid's age at the time, but also the seriousness of the actions. With the sentence, Zahid will spend decades in prison, with little chance of release until he is much older. The next case is about a son who turned on his own mother before terrorizing strangers in 2 states. Keith Gibson's life was never simple. His path toward trouble started long before his name ever appeared in headlines. He was born in Philadelphia in 1982. Many accounts do not focus much on his birth, but on the unstable path he followed later in life. People who knew him described his childhood as chaotic. His home life was unstable and filled with emotional struggles. They recalled that he often showed anger, mood swings, and difficulty controlling himself. His mother, Christine Gibson, was the main figure in his life, but their relationship was rocky. Keith sometimes blamed her for his failures. Their home became a place of constant arguments and resentment. As a teenager, Keith drifted into small offenses. He was caught trespassing, stealing minor items, and getting into fights. By the time he reached his late teens, he was already around weapons and danger. His later actions were not sudden. They came from a growing pattern that built over the years. One of his first major cases happened in 2008. On July 6th, Keith, who was about 26 at the time, joined 2 others, James Hinson and Kelly Gibbs, in a robbery in Edgemoor, Delaware. During that incident, 36-year-old Stanley Savon Jones lost his life. Witnesses, ballistics, and bullet casings tied Keith to the act. He was arrested later that fall at his mother's home. Keith was convicted and sentenced to 20 years in prison for manslaughter, weapons possession, and related charges. Behind bars, Keith remained troubled. He spent more than 10 years in prison. In December 2020, he was paroled to a community corrections facility, but he struggled to adjust. In 2021, he violated parole by leaving Delaware and traveling to Philadelphia. His relationship with his mother grew even worse. She threatened to remove him as the beneficiary of her life insurance. Tensions rose, and Keith's stability collapsed. Once free, he returned to aggressive quickly. On January 28, 2021, Keith entered Al Medina Traders, a store in Philadelphia. Inside, he fatally shot 2 men. 50-year-old Eric Flores was struck in the head. 42-year-old Roy Caban was shot twice in the face. The act happened during a robbery, and witnesses described it as cold and calculated. On February 8th, Keith targeted his own mother. Christine was working at RHD Peer Support House, where she was a supervisor. Keith entered her workplace and shot her once in the head. Reports suggested it was linked to their disputes over life insurance and control in his life. That same month, authorities tried to revoke his parole. They pushed for him to serve the remaining 6.5 years of his sentence, but the court decided otherwise. Instead, Keith received only 31 days in prison for the violation, followed by strict probation. The judge believed he had secured housing and employment in Philadelphia. This decision gave Keith the freedom to act again. On May 15, 2021, Keith struck in Ellesmere, Delaware. He forced his way into a Metro by T-Mobile store. He pulled 28-year-old Leslie Lyseth Ruiz Basilio to the back of the store, shot her in the head, and fled with money, cell phones, and her SUV. The act was caught on CCTV. The stolen SUV was later found near his Philadelphia home. Less than a month later, on June 5th, Keith targeted a Dunkin' Donuts in Philadelphia. Early in the morning, he waited outside, then forced 41-year-old Christine Lugo to open the shop. He pushed her inside, demanded money, and then shot her in the head. That same day in Wilmington, Delaware, he also ended the life of 42-year-old Ronald Wright while carrying out a street theft. In the days after, he robbed at least 3 more people. One victim survived by pretending to be lifeless. On June 8th, law enforcement caught up to him. In Wilmington, Keith tried to rob a Rite Aid pharmacy while wearing body armor and carrying a revolver. The clerk placed a GPS tracker in the cash. That tracker led police straight to Keith. He was arrested without resistance. On him, they found ammunition, gloves, a mask, and a gun. In his hiding places, they also found the revolver linked to the shootings. The evidence against him was overwhelming. CCTV, ballistic matches, stolen property, phone data, surveillance, and eyewitness accounts all pointed to him. In October 2023, prosecutors in Delaware moved forward first. Jury selection began. Over 80 witnesses were listed. The evidence presented included CCTV of Ruiz Basilio, of Wright during the incident, and of the attempted shooting of store clerk Bilal al-Mansouri, who survived by pretending to be lifeless after being shot at. He later testified, saying he was certain Keith was the man who targeted him. Ballistic analysis tied bullets to Keith's revolver. Surveillance showed him at the scenes wearing the same clothing as in the videos. The stolen SUV and other items were found near his home. A woman he lived with at the time also identified him in the footage. The defense did not deny his presence in the shootings. Instead, they argued there was no DNA or fingerprints directly tying him to the weapons. But the state's evidence was solid and layered. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury found him guilty on all counts. These included 2 counts of taking a life, attempted taking of a life, several armed thefts, firearm charges, conspiracy, and other offenses. In March 2024, Superior Court Judge Ferris Wharton sentenced Keith. He received 7 life sentences without parole, plus 296 years for additional counts. The judge told him, "I have given you as much as I can. It is not enough." As of now, Keith remains incarcerated in Delaware. He is also awaiting extradition to Pennsylvania to face further trials for other victims. including his mother, Lugo, Flores, and Caban.